Hello, I'm Anthony. Today we're going to have a look at amp modeling in Amplitube 5. And today we're going to have a look at a couple of main features. I want to talk about the preset browser because I think that's one of Amplitube's weakest aspects. And then we're going to go on to have a look at some of the configuration options for amp models themselves. If you find this video useful today, check out the Patreon and YouTube channel member links below. It's an awesome way to help support my channel. Okay, first things first, let's deal with the preset browser. Now, when you first install Amplitube 5, you're going to get a configuration in the preset browser. I'll show you that in a moment, but I just want to have a very quick look at the file structure that you're likely to see. It's going to be something like this. You'll have Amplitube 5 and a CS and possibly a Max. Depending on which bundles you own, you're going to get these top level views. And then as you drill down into these things, so I've gone into the legacy folder here, you'll see all sorts of stuff underneath. So we have a bundles folder. There's only got one thing in. Collections has got tons of stuff, and you can see all of these different amp models. It's a hot mess. It's really difficult to actually figure out what's going on. We have amp models at the same level as Jimi Hendrix here. Those folders that you've just seen, that's actually a backup drive of mine that I've lifted that stuff from because I've reconfigured Amplitube 5 to look like this now. Instead of that hodgepodge of basically meaningless folders, I've organized my top level hierarchy by manufacturer. So I've basically gone through the presets that come bundled. I had about 2,500 presets in my full installation. And at the moment, I'm actually in the process of migrating them to this new structure. Now, as you can see at the moment, I've only got 1,117 presets in my structure, so more than half of them are missing, and I'm in the process of migrating them, and I'm going to show you an example of that today. You take a look at what happens in the browser when I scroll my mouse wheel. What on earth is that left-hand menu doing, scrolling up and down? In fact, if I open the tags window as well, to make that disappear off the screen, now all three windows are scrolling up and down. How that got past the release team in IK Multimedia's development department, I have no idea. If I, as a developer, pass this to my testing team, I would expect it to get thrown straight back at me with a big defect stamped over the top of the release. That is absolutely unbelievable. So it doesn't matter which window you scroll, you're going to get some random combination of other things going up and down. So what I've tried to do is get to the point where these windows have few enough results that they don't scroll. My first stage was to break down each of the preset bundles into individual models, and that gets me some of the way. Let's get back to this. Let's find it. I have to drag the scroll bar, pick up the American tube. If I select one of my sound character tags, which is a reasonably useful thing to do, now I get a fairly usable result set in the right-hand pane. So let's have a look at how I've done that. How do I manage my presets? If you want to get to the stage where you might not necessarily want to organize your presets by manufacturer, but however you want to do it, I'm pretty sure you can improve on what comes out of the box, which is basically a completely chaotic mess. All of the presets for Amplitube 5 are contained in this folder structure. It's going to be in your Documents folder, IK Multimedia Amplitude 5, and this presets folder is what you just saw. Those are the top level manufacturers. Everything else I've put in this manually created unsorted presets folder. Now, I am in the process of doing this conversion, so this isn't going to look exactly like it will on your system, but suffice to say, anything that I put in this unsorted presets folder isn't seen by Amplitube 5, so this is basically a temporary holding area. Let's say I'm in the mood to do a little bit of sorting. I'm going to pull some of these presets back into Amplitube 5. If I pick this slash folder, let's have a look what's in here. Okay, so there's three presets in this folder called Gate. I'm going to right click, cut. I'm going to paste Gate into my presets folder. I'm going to jump back over to Amplitube and I'll click this refresh button at the top. It's now going to load those three slash presets into a new top level folder, and here it is. First time round, it doesn't seem to get this results list correct. Classic Friday afternoon development stuff, this. So let's have a look at these three presets now. What have we got? So if I click on my amp model button and then select the amp itself, it kind of jumps me to what that setting is. So it's a British Tube Lead 1. Back up to my browser. That's also a British Tube Lead 1. Are they all the same? Oh, brilliant. Okay, so all 3 of these presets are the same, which means it's going to be really easy for me to move them into the correct folder. But what is British Tube Lead 1? Well, actually, it's an emulation of a Marshall amplifier. Most of the emulation mappings can be found by scouring through various IK Multimedia user manuals or the information's available online. I've basically collated this together through primarily these manual searches and some individual kind of internet queries to find them. But if we have a look at, what was it, British Tube Lead 1, there you go, it's a Marshall JCM 800. Just a quick note as far as this mapping file is concerned. I've basically been through every one of the, what have I got, 112 emulations in my particular installation. I've got IK Multimedia Total Studio Max, whatever the latest version is, and it seems to come bundled with all sorts of different Amplitube installations, and this is what I've got. It's got some custom shop stuff in there, so I've never individually bought any Amplitube packages themselves, but I do have a pretty good collection of essentially random stuff. I've been through the entire list in Amplitube 5 and individually made sure that every one of these mappings is correct. If I've ever got any config files or presets or anything like this, I always make it available to my patrons and channel members. So let's make sure we've got an equivalent folder to drop those presets into, and sure enough, there it is, British Tube Lead 1. So I can now pick up those 3 presets, cut them out of there, paste them into there, refresh my browser. Now you'll see that that gate folder has disappeared again, but what I should really have done, just to keep everything nice and clean, is to actually delete the empty folder as well. And now when we head over in the Marshall folder, British Tube Lead 1, one of them was called Strong Gate, and there it is. So my total preset list has just gone up by 3, 1,120. And that's how I'm in the process of basically subsuming all of those presets into my collection. Whenever I'm in a sorting mood, I'll pick up a new folder and deal with that one. At this point, we're going to get into looking at a specific example of an amp model. I have a piece of music in the background with a simple guitar line over it. And I've chosen this Brown Rhythm preset as the sound that I'm going to use. Now this preset is a legacy preset. In fact, the vast majority of the presets that you get in this Amplitube directory are going to be Amplitube 4 legacy presets. Amplitube 5 is perfectly happy to read them. But if I attempt to make any change to this Brown Rhythm preset, it's going to store a new copy as an AT5P file. Let me show you an example of that. So I'm going to change this cab to be a 2x12 cab. So with the cabinet model selected, I simply click the new amp that I want to overwrite it. Now I want to save this preset. I can't overwrite this Brown Rhythm preset because that's the old legacy preset. When I tell Amplitube to save those changes, all of my tags are identical. I just click save. And now a second copy of Brown Rhythm appears in my directory. Now at this point, if I want to keep everything nice and clean, I'm going to basically get rid of the old preset. And I've effectively just upgraded that preset to a new Amplitube 5. It's got the amp model, the cabinet that I want. So that's the last word of presets I'm going to talk about today. Let's get on to talk about actually making sound. I'm going to close the browser down, and now I'm going to click on the speaker cabinet. And this brings us into the speaker room. Oh, we don't want to see that just at the moment. So this is the nice simple view of the speaker cabinet. We've got 4 microphones in use, 2 of them in front of the mic, and we've got 2 room mics as well. It's worth saying at this point, I'm not going to go into the individual settings for every amplifier. I'm not going to talk about bass, middle and treble. I'm going to presume you know about that. We're talking about how to configure the environment in which these amplifiers are working. So here's our cabinet that I've chosen. We never really put microphones right in the middle of the speaker because there's actually a cone of silence right in the very center. Move the microphones very slightly offset from the center. That's going to be the microphones at their brightest. And as we move the microphones towards the edge of the cabinet, they're going to get duller. Basically, different points of the speaker generate different frequencies. So I want to perform an experiment with this guitar line where I move these microphones and we hear that tonal change. I'm just going to configure these microphones though, because they'll have been reset to their initial state when I changed that cabinet. Let's head over into the mixer. I'm going to pan my microphones left and right and equalize their levels. Okay, so that's reasonably well stereo matched now. Now let's move those microphone positions. So that's at its lowest, its dullest. And that's them getting brighter. The second metric is moving the microphone stand itself forwards and backwards. This is enhancing something called the proximity effect. As you move a microphone closer to an amplifier, it accentuates bass frequencies. It's all to do with the proportion of sound hitting the front of the microphone as opposed to the back of the microphone. That ratio changes between bass frequencies and treble high frequencies. So the closer to the microphone we get, the closer to the microphone we get, the bassier it's going to sound. So that's at its thinnest or its highest frequency accentuated. And that you can quite hit clearly here, particularly with this microphone, an enhancement of those low frequencies. So don't underestimate this stuff as a tonal control. It can have a really big impact on the sound. Finally, you saw me in the mixer adjusting the stereo spread between left and right. As far as stereo is concerned though, even better than having two microphones panned this way in the field is to have two separate independent cabinets. When I clicked this little button here, you saw a second cabinet be introduced. Let's make it a little bit more easy to see. So I'm just going to click on the cab itself. It's actually brought in a 4x12 and we'll have a 2x12 orange. Now that I've introduced a pair of cabinets, my preferred method for mixing these together is to have the cabinets themselves. I'm going to control click on all of these pan settings and then jump over to cab 2, make sure that they're centered as well. And I'll control the left right pan from the mixer. This bus input is basically saying everything that's coming out of this cab is going into this yellow slider. So if I move the right hand cab, which is cab 2 over here, and the left hand cab, which I access from this button here, not the symbol for the cabinet itself. If you click that, you head back into the room. We're operating on the mixer here, and we jump backwards and forwards between the two cabinets by clicking these buttons. So cab 1 is hard left, cab 2 is hard right, and I've now accomplished the pan from here. But let's get the mix balance between those two cabinets sorted. I just ran a test here and one of them is way too loud. Okay, so cab 2 is much too loud, and you can see it's actually redlining. We don't want to see red dots anywhere in our setup. So now I can see this is the master stereo out of those two cabinets being fed together, and now I can bring the volume back up. I've actually got room on this cab as well, as I've just noticed, so take all the reverb away. I'm calling it reverb. It's actually the room microphones. It's not a reverb effect. It's the fact that we have some microphones sat way above us. In fact, this is as good an opportunity as any to bring it back in. Let's jump back over to the physical view. So here we've got the room microphones. Each of these cabinets is in their own room, and we can choose different room mics for each of them. It's not immediately obvious how you get to them. If you click on the microphone itself, can you see that this display has now said room mics? So if we change these settings to condenser 414 and jump over to the Fender cab again, they're still the condenser 87 microphone. So each cab is in its own room, completely isolated, but we get the option to choose different room mics for each of them. If you click on the overheads option, you can see we've only actually got 4 different types of overhead microphone to choose from. So now that we've configured our choice of room mic, we can bring the room mix back up. And that's just going to add ambience to the overall sound. If I take the front of cab microphones completely down, now you're just hearing those room mics. In addition to being able to adjust the microphones, and I will admit this isn't something I do very often, you can adjust the speakers themselves. I did that a bit too quickly. I pressed this speaker icon. And now I can change the speakers in the cabinet, and you change them individually. So if I choose one that looks very different, let's choose this blue Brit Alnico. That's only overwritten the currently selected speaker cone. So it's literally just changed one of the speakers. What I find it easiest to do is, having just done that job, just drag it over into the second speaker as well, and that overwrites them both. Whichever cone you have selected is the one that's going to get updated. So I've selected the right hand cone, and now that's just been overwritten. Select the left hand cone, and that's just been overwritten. There's a slightly odd kind of split perspective in the interface, because we have these 2 buttons in the main viewer, one for speakers and one for mixing controls, which is primarily where you configure your microphones. And this is where you can control things like their phase, for instance. If I set one of these microphones out of phase, the volume will drop, because basically the microphones are slightly cancelling each other out. Watch the output levels. Drops significantly. You can also set the microphones at 45 degrees, which is again as another tonal control. It makes them very slightly duller. I don't commonly use that function very much, so I won't overemphasize its value. But basically, in this kind of mini mixer, these controls here are directly equivalent to the settings in this mix panel. So if I drop both of those microphones down and head back into cab view, now the volumes have both been dropped. So it's just a different view. The reason I'm mentioning this is because it treads on the gear selector options, particularly with the speaker. Let's say, for instance, I'm in speaker mode, and then in the gear selector, I choose microphone. It updates the cabinet view to show you the microphone as well. So it's kind of confusing as to what you're exactly looking at. These buttons toggle on and off to give you this split pane in the cabinet view, and these buttons in the gear selector, this is the gear selector, the right hand pane. These options kind of do the same thing. You see that when I click on them, they're kind of imposing this split view back on me, and then I can disable it from these buttons. So it is kind of clunky and takes a while to get used to, but just come to terms with the fact that there's a little bit of redundancy between these options, and the mic is kind of tied to the mixer, and the speaker selection option is kind of tied to this speaker button here. We also have this third option, the room. This is basically the only place where you can choose the background, the room itself that you're in. So having selected the room in the gear selector, I can now put us in a subway. So the Fender cabinet is now in a subway. The orange amplifier is still in the original, what is that? It's one of the rooms, mid-studio, this one here. Obviously, if I put us in a bathroom, that's going to have a pretty big impact on the sound. It's going to significantly brighten the tone. Messed with those volume levels, didn't I? That's fine. In this room view in the gear selector, that's also an alternative way to get to your overhead mics. So here they are at the top. So if I've got these mics selected in my cab view, and I click condenser 12, it's just updated the microphones. I don't have to do it from this menu view down here. One of the features that's engaged by default is the linking of amplifiers to their corresponding cabinets. I'm going to go down to single cabinet view, and in the gear selector, I'm going to choose my amplifier. So now that I'm in amplifier view, if I select the amplifier and click on one of these amps, let's have an AD30. The cabinet just updated to be a matched pair with the amp. So if we have a look at the cab, here's our orange cab. This linking is on by default. If I select the amp, then choose a new amp, it's going to overwrite my cabinet. But you can unlock the connection. What you need to do is select the cabinet and then click on the cabinet itself. That gives you specific access to the cabinet related features, and this lock symbol here is what connects the amp together with the cab. So now I can choose a new amp and the cabinet stays behind. Click the cab, back into room view, re-engage the lock. It's just overridden the Fender cab with my Vox cab, and there's my Vox speakers. More often than not, I'm happy to keep linking engaged. It makes sure your cabinet is properly matched to your amp, but it's perfectly fine on occasion to break the connection and play around yourself. The final thing that I'm going to show you today is how to save core models so that when you want to load something up, let's deal with an amp, for example, get something with some controls on. So let's say I like this British Copper amp, and the settings that I like have this vibrato control at 9 o'clock. I can save this amplifier model with those settings as its own preset. If I right click on the model and say save model preset, it pops me up into a new window, and it's actually in the same folder, in the documents folder. Here's my Amplitube 5, but instead of being in presets, I'm now in models. And I have a convention that if I'm creating a default model type, I call them core. Let's click save. And now each time I load an amp, let's load one that I know I have a core for. The OR120 is bound to have one. I can right click, load model preset. There is my core options. So basically, take a look at, let's turn the gain all the way down and then load my core options. It's set them to my pre-configured kind of personal preferences for that particular amp. So this is where I'm going to override the preset. I've loaded my preset, I've got all my basic stuff, and then I'll say, well, I want these settings, my favored settings for that amplifier. Model presets are your friend for that. And as you saw, you can store all of those inside your models folder. And that's us done for today. Hope you enjoyed the video. Please hit like if you did. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see more content. I'll see you next time. Thanks very much.